There are moments in history when the rhythm of the world seems to change. Not through the sound of guns or the roar of rockets, but through the quiet determination of people who simply refuse to remain where they've always been told they belong. The story of India in this century is exactly that. It's not a story of sudden miracles or strokes of luck. It's a story of patience, grit, and the long march of a billion dreams converging toward one purpose: to take their rightful place in shaping the destiny of our world. When people say that India has shaken America, what they really mean is that the world has finally been forced to see India not as a supporting character, not as a land of potential that's always in waiting, but as a leading force capable of rewriting the very structure of global power. This isn't about rivalry, it's about realization. Because for decades, power was concentrated in places where history and wealth intersected, but now in the 21st century, power flows through knowledge, innovation, and confidence. And on all three fronts, India has begun to lead. The rise of India did not begin with a headline or a single leader declaration. It began in classrooms where young minds refused to be limited by outdated curriculums. It began in the dusty streets of small towns where entrepreneurs turned local challenges into opportunities. It began in the homes of families who saved every rupee to educate their children, believing that knowledge would one day unlock doors that colonialism, poverty, and prejudice had once sealed shut. And now, those seeds have grown into something extraordinary. From Silicon Valley to Bengaluru, from Wall Street to Mumbai, the language of progress increasingly carries an Indian accent. India has become the heartbeat of the digital economy, the architect of global innovation, and the conscience of democratic resilience. It has done this not by mimicking others, but by carving out its own model, a blend of tradition and transformation, of humility and ambition. America, long accustomed to leading the world's economic and technological revolutions, has suddenly found itself watching India rise, not as a follower, but as a parallel power, one that competes on ideas, on scale, and on willpower. And that shift has been unsettling for many who believe the old order was permanent. You can sense it in the tone of debates, in the anxiety of policymakers, in the subtle recalculations of alliances. Because when a new power rises, it doesn't just disrupt economies, it challenges assumptions. India's message to the world has never been one of dominance. It has always been one of dignity. The true essence of India's power lies in its ability to lead without intimidation, to progress without oppression, to grow without greed. The country's democracy, imperfect as any, remains one of the most vibrant on earth, messy, loud, unpredictable, yet magnificently alive. That's the paradox that confounds so many. How can a nation so diverse, so chaotic, so opinionated still move forward with such determination? The answer is simple. It's because India believes in something bigger than power. It believes in purpose. And when a nation believes in purpose, it cannot be ignored. That's what has shaken America. Not fear of loss, but of conviction. For generations, America represented the dream, the idea that ambition and freedom could lift anyone from anywhere. But now millions around the world look to India and see that same dream reflected in new colors. They see a people who took independence not just as a date in history, but as a permanent challenge to remain self-reliant yet open, to remain humble yet unstoppable. The Indian century isn't about replacing one superpower with another. It's about redefining what power itself means. In the old world, power meant control over land, over trade, over others. In the new world, power means collaboration over technology, over ideas, over solutions that affect every human being on this planet. Whether it's climate change, digital security, or health innovation, India has stepped forward not as a spectator, but as a solver. That shift, that moral courage to act for the common good, is what shakes the foundations of complacency everywhere. Let's talk about technology for a moment. For years, America was seen as the temple of innovation, and in many ways it still is. But quietly, persistently, India has built a technological ecosystem that doesn't just serve global corporations, it empowers ordinary citizens. UPI, Adari, and Digital India aren't just programs. They are revolutions in access. They show what happens when technology becomes a tool of inclusion rather than exclusion. In a time when much of the world debates how to make democracy compatible with digitalization, India has already found the formula. Connect everyone, trust the citizen, and move forward together. That's not just innovation, that's leadership. Now, some in America may feel threatened by this new assertiveness, because for decades the assumption was that progress flowed in one direction from west to east, from developed to developing. But now ideas flow both ways. American companies depend on Indian talent. American universities thrive on Indian intellect. American hospitals rely on Indian doctors. The symmetry of dependence has shifted. And in that shift lies the new balance of the world. Yet India's rise doesn't come at anyone's expense. It's not a zero-sum game. When India grows, the world gains. When India builds, others benefit. When India stands up, others find the courage to do the same. Because what India represents is possibility. The possibility that democracy and diversity are not weaknesses, but strengths. That progress doesn't require uniformity, but unity of purpose. So yes, in boardrooms and foreign policy circles, in newsrooms and diplomatic corridors, there is a quiet recognition. India has changed the game. America, once the teacher, now has something to learn, and what it must learn is humility. Because leadership in the 21st century will not belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who listen the deepest. It will belong to nations that treat others as equals, not as instruments of convenience. There's a saying that power reveals character. When you look at India's global approach, you see a nation trying to reveal a character rooted in restraint, compassion, and responsibility. When it builds partnerships with Africa, it does so with respect. When it engages with the Pacific or the Middle East, it speaks of shared growth. When it sits at the negotiating tables of the world, it carries the voice of the global South, not as a slogan, but as a duty. That perhaps is what unsettles the old powers most. Not India's strength, but its sincerity. Because sincerity is unpredictable. You can predict ambition, you can even predict aggression, but sincerity changes the rules. It introduces trust where others expect manipulation, and that makes people rethink their strategies, their expectations, their comfort zones. In defense, too, India has refused to play by traditional scripts. It doesn't seek expansion, it seeks stability. It doesn't threaten borders, it protects them. It doesn't wage wars of conquest, it wages wars against poverty, against hunger, against inequality. Yet, make no mistake, India's deterrence is real and it's formidable. A nation that builds nuclear submarines and satellites with the same hands that build rural schools is not one to be underestimated. The Indian soldier stands not just for his end, but for an idea that peace must be earned and defended, not imposed. And that's something the world needs to hear again and again. Economically, India has become one of the engines of global growth. Its GDP numbers tell only part of the story. The real measure lies in what's happening on the ground, in startups, in renewable energy, in the shift towards self-reliance. The Make in India initiative isn't just industrial policy, it's psychological liberation. It says to the world, we can build for ourselves and we can build for others too. And the world has noticed. From semiconductor deals to defense partnerships, the global supply chain is slowly bending toward India's gravity. But here's the deeper truth. India's rise has not come through confrontation. It has come through conviction. It has not shouted for attention. It has earned it. It has not chased validation. It has generated it. That's the kind of rise that lasts because it's built on values, not vanity. America, to its credit, understands this more than it admits. Beneath the political noise and the posturing, there's respect, a growing acknowledgement that India's rise strengthens, not threatens, the balance of global democracy. But respect comes with adjustment. It requires recognizing that the era of unilateral leadership is over. We are entering an age of partnerships, partnerships of equals, and in that world, India stands tall, not as a shadow, but as a light. Still, there will be challenges. There will be those who question whether India can sustain this pace, whether its democracy can withstand its divisions, whether its growth can remain inclusive. But every great nation has faced those doubts. What defines them is not whether the doubts exist, but how they are answered, and India has a way of answering with action, not argument. Every time it is doubted, it delivers. Every time it is underestimated, it surprises. Every time it is challenged, it rises higher. That's the rhythm of this new India, steady, determined, and deeply rooted in self-belief. It doesn't seek permission to lead, it simply leads by example. It doesn't imitate the old powers. It invents a new paradigm, and the world is paying attention. When international summits debate the future of digital currency, India's model becomes the reference. When climate talks demand leadership from emerging economies, India's solar mission becomes the standard. When conversations about artificial intelligence and data sovereignty take place, India's ethical approach becomes the benchmark. So when people say India is shaking America, maybe that's true, but it's not a tremor of hostility, it's an awakening of respect. It's the realization that leadership can wear many faces, speak many languages, and come from many lands. In the grand arc of history, every century belongs to those who dare to redefine it. The 20th century belonged to those who built empires. The 21st century will belong to those who build empathy. And in that race, India has already taken a commanding lead. Not because it's wealthier, but because it's wiser. Not because it dominates, but because it dignifies. Not because it demands, but because it delivers. That's the new reality of our world. The balance of power is not shifting, it has shifted. The question is not whether India will lead, but how it will choose to lead. And if its past is any guide, it will lead by example, patiently, peacefully, purposefully. So yes, India has shaken America, but perhaps what it has really done is shake the entire world awake, to remind it that greatness isn't inherited, it's earned, that leadership isn't declared, it's demonstrated, and that the future doesn't belong to those who cling to power. It belongs to those who expand its meaning. Freedom is strongest when it protects those who disagree. The real test of liberty is not in how it treats the majority, but in how it safeguards the voices that challenge, question, and dissent. In every society, there comes a moment when the easy path is to silence opposition, to label it inconvenient or unpatriotic, to wrap unity in conformity and call it peace. But that is not freedom. It is fragility disguised as strength. True freedom draws its strength from diversity, from the noise of disagreement that refines as truth, from the friction of debate that shapes understanding. When a nation has the courage to protect dissent, it declares to the world that its identity is not so weak that it must fear difference. Throughout history, the societies that have endured are those that have welcomed disagreement as a form of loyalty. Disagreement is not rebellion, it is engagement. It is the citizen saying, I believe this nation can be better. When such voices are suppressed, a country loses more than opinions. It loses innovation, accountability, and moral clarity. Every great idea that reshaped humanity began as an unpopular thought. Freedom, therefore, is not about the comfort of the present majority, but about the survival of the next generation's imagination. Protecting those who disagree is not an act of kindness, it is an act of wisdom. Because the same protections that defend dissent today will defend the truth tomorrow. A society that silences a few eventually teaches itself to silence all. But a nation that protects the critic, the reformer, the artist, and the skeptic builds a foundation that can withstand storms of politics and ideology. The strength of democracy lies not in its own anonymity, but in its ability to stay whole while divided, to argue without tearing apart, to disagree without destroying. It takes courage to allow criticism, especially when it challenges deeply held beliefs or cherished traditions. But freedom without courage is decoration. It looks noble but breaks easily. When we protect those who disagree, we admit that no single voice, however powerful, holds the full measure of truth. We accept that progress is a dialogue, not a decree. The freedom that protects dissenters does more than keep them safe. It keeps the nation honest. It reminds leaders that their authority exists, not to be warped, but to be questioned. It reminds citizens that their responsibility is not blind obedience, but informed participation. The strength of freedom, then, is not measured by how loud the anthem sounds, but by how safely a whisper of dissent can be heard. It is not the applause of agreement that builds a great society. It is the resilience to face opposing ideas and still stand together. True freedom has no need to silence. It thrives in the noise of debate, the clash of ideas, the uncomfortable beauty of